That's crazy. Hey Hannah, it's recording. It's all
Cool.
over to you.
Did you want to come a bit closer, or?
Yeah, I reckon that's a good idea.
You don't have to, but it just
No, that's good.
feels like we're far away. Cool. So I'm happy to keep today as like interactive and kind of discussion based as what we can. But I'm going to talk about, I guess, research, data and clinical practice from someone that's been a practicing EP and then now moved into the research space. If we get time and you want to, I'm more than happy to talk about menstrual cycle stuff as well. If you want to talk about the actual like nitty gritty of my PhD and what we know about menstrual cycles and athletes, I'm more than happy to do that depending on whether or not we get time, but whatever, not fast. So yeah, the stars next to the AEP, because technically I'm not actually an AEP anymore. It's been the last month that I've actually just given up my registration. So I'm technically still an exercise physiologist, but I gave up my AEP registration because I wasn't really using it anymore. So that's why the stars there. It's no other fun reason other than that.
You still passed. You're just not accredited, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm an AEP. I don't have an AEP registration with EST anymore because I didn't want to pay the fees when I wasn't using my, to be honest. I'm a level 2 ASCAR about to be, and a PhD student at VU. So today, I guess we'll cover a little bit about me and I guess what led me to the career that I'm doing now and why I think that research in clinical-based settings is super important and how we can actually use it to our advantage. And then what we can do with that information to figure out how we're actually making an impact and how we make decisions. Now, my kind of background is more in sports science, so understanding how we make athletes better and what is better and what is success for athletes, but we can kind of chat about what that looks like from a clinical point of view as well. I've been out of the game of EP for a little while, so I'll need your help in like reorientating myself to the space. So this is my messy timeline of my career, but I'll walk you through it because it's kind of an interesting one, to be honest. But I did my Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science and my Master's at Deakin from 2012 to pretty much 2018. That's me on our grand final day in 2018. It was pouring down with rain about half time, and then we ended up winning that to win a grand final, which was like one of the most epic moments of my life. And it was right about then when I was doing my Masters of EP, and we had a research project, and I submitted, it was first year of AFW, submitted a project to as part of the unit that I was doing, and the supervisor was like, yep, please can you do this research, because on like AFW incidences and injuries. And I was like, nah, never want to do research ever. I just want to go and earn money. I want to be a clinician. I want to work in sport. I want to keep my career as an EP and working in sport and just do that. She was like, please can you do this research? And I was like, no. COVID kind of hit, I guess, in like 2020, like it hit everyone else. And I quit my full-time job, my cushy full-time job working in a clinic in the middle of a pandemic because it turned out to be a really toxic work environment, which obviously it's not what you guys have here. And I was very confused about why we were doing what we were doing as EPs and how I knew that I was on the right track and how I knew that what I was doing was actually working, pretty much. So then I started working in a clinic, which is like the top green one there, called Modus, which was more up my speed, which was a bit more of a hybrid S&C type performance model. And then I got to consult as an EP there, and I got to set up EP in a system that hadn't done that before. So that was like a really cool thing to be able to do. At the time, I was like, I'm really interested in menstrual cycles and female athlete health. I think I want to go and do some research, but I don't want to go into PhD completely. So I actually went back and did my honours at Deakin with a beautiful research group that are mostly dietitians and was endurance athletes, which is cool, but not as cool as what I find team sport stuff. And then I got offered some teaching at ACU, and I was like, don't think I want to work in a clinic anymore. So I started consulting or running the clinic at ACU, still working in sport the whole time. And then about 2022, I was like, yep, I love data. I want to be in data. I want to do sports science. I think I want to do my PhD, which circled back to 2015, which I thought was never going to happen. But I quickly figured out that I didn't love data. That's me down there coding, which was like something I never thought I'd ever do in my life, but now I do all the time. And then I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't love data, but I loved making decisions based off the data that I was collecting. And that really kind of helped me understand why I was really confused about being an EP in the early days. And I felt like I wasn't really sure why we were doing what we were doing. So I started my PhD at the start of March last year. So I'm 18 months in now, nearly 2 years in. And I am an applied researcher, which I'll explain what that is in a minute. And then I also consult for a company called Live Life Whole, where I go into schools and sporting clubs and teach young women about their menstrual cycles, and it's the literal love of my life because it's the absolute best thing to be able to do. So as an applied researcher, I'm a second year PhD candidate, so I research how and if the menstrual cycle affects team sport performance from an individual lens, which is what I think really helps me to understand how we can collect data in clinical settings, because I can't use big groups or big statistical power numbers that journals want you to be able to do to submit papers, because I think we have like 2 to 3 girls on my list at the moment that actually have a normal menstrual cycle. So there was so much decision making in terms of how I was going to set up my project that I wasn't able to do because I just don't have the same hormonal profile across all of my athletes. So I really had to pivot and figure out how I was going to set up a project when all 30 of my athletes are completely different. So I look at research from an individual lens, and then how that approach can inform how we make decisions based in team sport. My job, which is really fun, is to essentially just like challenge the status quo of what we do in elite sport and basically just poke holes in people's theories and whether or not that's the best way that we should be going about things, which is really, really fun. Sometimes I can't quite believe that's my job. But amongst that, I read a lot, I'm on Excel a lot, and I ask people if they have their period pretty much every single day. And that was me yesterday, actually, in the lab, which I occasionally do, which I just thought was really fun because my lab can be the actual lab, which is where Alana is, or or the field, or the gym, or wherever we're going to be. And then I also facilitate and write content for Live Life Whole. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but kind of understanding, I guess, what is research. And someone told me the other day that the definition of a PhD back into like Greek mythology is that it was simply just a lover of wisdom. And I kind of love that because I was like, well, I like knowledge and I like feeling wise. So I think we think as EPs that a PhD or an MRes, so Masters of Research or Honours or things like that, is the only kind of way that we can do research. And hopefully after today, you realise that that's not the only way that we can go about it. And there's actually like a real merit to understanding the different levels of research and then how you can embed that into your practice, because that's essentially what I do. It's a systematic investigation into the study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions, which I think is kind of like the reach new conclusions bit is, again, probably something I'd put with an asterisk, because in my experience, research doesn't often conclude things. Has anyone watched Lessons in Chemistry, the TV show or the book? No? Okay, read it. Lessons in Chemistry.
No.
Oh, it's fabulous. Read it. Anyway, her daughter comes back to the point where she's like, they're talking about research, talking about science, and she's like, well, in science, like I just finished the end of the science experiment and I had more questions, and the mum's like, well, yeah, like that's science. So I don't think you often reach new conclusions, which I think is the part that puts people off from doing this stuff. Is like, well, I have to come up with this big groundbreaking discovery for it to be worthwhile, and it's just like not the point at all. So this was my traditional model of, I guess, how I approached the unsureness of what I was doing when I was doing it as an EP. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but this is kind of how I operated for the first like 4 to 5 years of my career. I got a patient. I wasn't really sure what was happening with him. I was a bit stuck, or it was a condition that I hadn't seen before. It was a presentation that I didn't know about. And I was like, okay, I'll go and consult the literature, right? But who honestly has time to do all of that? Because it takes me probably 6 months to do a literature review. You don't have time to do that in clinical practice, right? And then you're like, great, this paper said do this. I'm going to go and do this. So I'm going to implement it. And then God knows what you actually find. Anyone had that experience, or is it just me? It's pretty much what happens. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and I think we can talk about like and I want your take on like what you're doing in terms of this stuff as well, because as I said, I've been out of the game for a little bit, so I know what I'm doing in a sports science lens, but it's good to think about it from an EP lens. In my understanding of this, psych and the medical world do embedded research really, really well, because psychologists and the medical field, they have to have like a research background to progress their career. They have to be qualified to be able to do that. EP, physio, S&C, you don't have to. So I think sports science is coming along in that way of the embedded kind of research pathway, which is where I am. But EP and physio have this like golden opportunity to make something out of this, and I think people need to take it, which is why we're here. So this is hopefully where we go away from, and I can teach you, hopefully, a slightly better approach in how you can navigate this. So there's a heap of barriers to doing quote unquote research in the field. And there's barriers from the clinician lens, which I'm sure that you could tell me about completely. And there's also barriers from, I guess, the research lens of why researchers don't do research in the field, which I think they should, but that's just me. So practitioners, time. You're not going to sit there and go through a whole research scope of what you want to do, right? Longitudinal studies cost money. They take time and money. Most people that I talk to that are in the EP world, I did a research unit at uni and I hated it, which was me, right? Until I figured out how fun research can actually be, and I was like, well, we can do something completely different with this. Skills, we don't know how to do research. And then my kind of bugbear is that in the EP world, at least, it's seen as one or the other. It's like you either go into the research world or you go full-time academia or you go out into clinical practice. And those are your two options. Or you go OC rehab, which is really a vibe, but you know, clearly not your vibe, not my vibe either. And that's where I think we're going wrong, is this like one or the other. It's like, no, we can actually do these two things together. From, I guess, a research lens, we don't have a lot of longitudinal outcomes. So we don't have a lot of long-term projects. We're not patient enough. If there's one thing that being a PhD student has taught me, it's how to be patient. Dissemination, which is like when you put your research out into the world, it's quite poor, it's misunderstood. So I think that's the other thing that EPs think, is they think the only way to present research is in a paper. And that's just completely false. In my world, paper writing is our currency that we work with, which I don't love, but it's part and parcel of being a PhD student. In your world, your currency is success with your outcomes, or your processes in your clinic are getting better, or whatever it is your KPIs are, that's your currency that you want to deal in, right? For us, it's papers, unfortunately. The other issue is that people are really against reporting limited findings or null hypothesis. So when nothing happened, people aren't willing to go down that pathway, investigate it, find out that it didn't work, and then actually present that with the courage to be like, I did this and it didn't work. And this is why, and this is how I might do it again next time. In my field of work, if I find that there's a whole heap of girls that aren't affected by their menstrual cycle across objective measures, which is kind of what we're finding at the moment, I can't want to find something, if that makes sense. I have to just accept that as the finding that I found. To me, it's actually even more interesting when I find something that didn't work. But that's the courage and the bravery that comes into doing that, right? The caveat to that is when you're in clinical practice, you want to deliver your patients an outcome, right? Because they're paying for it. So you don't want to be like, hey, I'm just going to do this trial on you for the next 6 weeks and it might not work, but I want you to pay weekly to come and do it. I do understand that, which we'll get to kind of like maybe how we can get around that in a minute. And then statistical power is why people often don't do research in the field, because they don't have a large enough group for it to be what a paper deems as necessary or a journal seems as like great to be able to publish. Like we didn't have enough people, it wasn't powerful enough to show actual standings. And I think that's an absolute crime because it stops good people from doing good investigative research. Are you still with me? Okay, cool. So patience is, I think, one of the things that you need in doing this kind of stuff. And we want outcomes fast, right? You want to get your patient to the outcome as quick as they possibly can. You don't want to spend 3 months tracking things to find out if it's going to work, which again, I think is a real downfall of understanding how you can do research type projects in a clinical setting. longer studies translate to more real world outcomes, right? Because that's what our patients do. It just takes them time to do stuff, or we have them for that longer period of time. That's a whole research mouthful in the middle, but basically longer studies, you have more confidence in your outcomes that you achieve over them, if that makes sense. This paper was kind of fascinating. They did like an undulating periodization model, and then they did like a linear periodization model across 12 weeks. First 6 weeks, they found that undulating was like much more beneficial than linear, and then they drew these conclusions in the abstract. Proof why you should never just read an abstract. Please don't do that. Because basically they then did the study for 12 weeks and they found that they didn't find any changes from 12 weeks. So if they just stopped the study at 6 weeks, they would be like, yep, undulating is far more better than linear periodization. They ended up doing it for 12 and they found that the same outcomes happened over 12 weeks. So you just got to kind of consider that we could be doing these things for a while. We might want to collect data for a long time. And I'll show you examples of how I've done this and how it's been really successful and how long it's actually taken me to do this. But the juice is worth the squeeze, I promise. Don't read the abstract. Again, clinicians and researchers are fearful that their non-significant findings mean that they're unsuccessful, which again is not the case. I think a lot of clinicians in the field also, they're really reluctant to upset the status quo. So they might want to put forward an idea that they've found in their clinic, or they've been tracking a group of their hamstring patients for 6 weeks, and that's different to what Dave Opar or Peter Maliaris or the big wigs in hamstring land have found. So I don't want to do that stuff because like, well, someone else, it's actually different to what they've done. And this is a whole another tangent, but people often don't want to do research-based projects because they might find something that conflicts with their belief system. So they get this like unconfirmation bias where they're like, well, I've been doing this form of hamstring rehab for 2 years. If you want to objectively measure whether or not that's working, you might not want to do that because it might confirm that you've actually been wrong. So people don't want to go down that path, if that makes sense. Because it's objective, right? Whereas I think inherently as EPs, we naturally go towards our what we think works best. Would you agree? Do you think we lose a bit of objectivity in like how we practice? I know I did.
I'm definitely like, I've got my ways of doing things, and
yeah.
sometimes it's harder to see it when you're not doing it. Like it's you just go through the motions of doing it your way, and
yep.
Sometimes it's harder to be like, actually, I think I was wrong, but it's harder to see it when you're doing it instead of like looking at it upon reflection.
Yeah, and if you have success, you're like, well, I'm not going to stop because I'm getting results, right?
If broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. And I'm not saying do that either. And then the other part of why people probably don't do research in the field or they don't do things like this is because they think that replication, they're like, well, someone's already done that, so why would I do it again? My entire project is based around what like 5 people did in Europe, but they haven't done it in AFLW athletes. So I'm not doing anything groundbreaking. I'm not magically finding this amazing bullet to tracking the menstrual cycle. Honestly, it's just better load management, to be honest with you. It's not revolutionary. It's not a game changer. It's not this like, what was that movie with the Oppenheimer movie where like something big happened? Research is not like that. It's just like the smallest step forward to find something kind of novel. And that's what people don't do it because they're like, I want to be the person that does, I want to be the Dave Opar and those kind of people. It takes like 20 years. But if you can contribute something to a field that you are passionate about or you want to get results in, then I think that's really powerful to be able to be in that space and make a difference in something that's, I'm going to end up being able to be really niched in an area of tracking menstrual cycles in field team sport athletes. That's where I want to be. So it's niche and it's really like selective, but that's what I want to be doing. And it's not going to solve the world's problems at all. You can still do projects that have been done previously. You just have to find a slightly different way of doing them. All right. So this is the research process, right? I'm going to teach you how this is like exactly what you do in clinical practice, pretty much, or exactly what we should be doing in clinical practice. So I identified the problem. I evaluated literature. I didn't really have to do that because I'd been doing this for years and years and years, working in the menstrual cycle space. I created a hypothesis, sort of. I designed some projects around it. I sort of described the population, though that came into like the research design. I'm currently collecting the data, and then when I'm done that, I'll do the analysis and I'll write some reports. Pretty easy to follow, right? Much better than the other thing that we had. So my problem was that we didn't know how the menstrual cycle affects female athletes or female team sport field athletes, if you want to get really specific. My hypothesis is that the menstrual cycle is so variable that it probably should be approached as in an individual way, which I have the research to back me up to do that. I identified the variables that are important to success in AFLW athletes, which is complicated within itself. And then I want to see if the menstrual cycle is going to affect the outcomes that people or the research world or the sporting world considers to be really, really important for the success of an AFLW athlete. My data collection is both subjective questionnaires, objective testing. I figured out how I was going to measure the outcomes that I wanted to prove. My analysis will be, did the phases of the menstrual cycle and where they were at have a significant change to the individual outcomes? So I'm comparing an athlete to an athlete across 3 different cycles. I'm not comparing an athlete A to athlete B, which is going to be really fun when I try and take this to a journal, because they're going to be like, no, but that's a future me problem. My supervisors say I can still do it, so we'll just go with that for now. And then my report writing or my dissemination is publications, because that's the currency that I have to deal in, unfortunately. Reports and presentations to the stakeholders that care about what I'm doing. So the people that co-fund my scholarship, the Western Bulldogs, they care about what I'm doing. Maybe the AFL if they're interested. At the moment, they don't seem to be. And then most importantly, be able to present this back to players in an easy to understand way. So my dissemination crosses like 4 different domains of being able to present information to people. And then hopefully I get to go to conferences and tell other people about what I did and how cool it was and what I found. What's this? Okay, so now you need your pens and your brains. I told you need pens. So you're going to think of a clinical problem that you have with a client. You're going to use the processes that I did to figure out how you can apply a research lens. You don't have to do a research project. Don't think you have to do a whole PhD. But like, how can you use that lens to solve a problem that you have? And that's how I kind of want you to see it. And that's what a good applied researcher or an objectified clinician would do, right? They define the problem, so they figure out what's actually happening. So I would say like shape the client to be a problem to solve in your mind. So what's a sticky case that you've got at the moment that you're like, I need to solve this problem. 2, describe what's happening. This is by far the most important step, because you can't do this or you can't do this without this. I will spend the longest on doing this. I spent 8 months doing this. It got boring after a while. What are the methods that other people use and what's actually happening to my client? 3, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? So keeping in mind that what you're going to test or what you're going to implement with your client, whether it be testing or an intervention. I'm not doing an intervention for this study. I'm just observing the menstrual cycles and the effect that it has. But I need to figure out how I'm going to measure that on the back end, if that makes sense. 4, what are the key performance indicators? So does your method in fact influence your outcome? So have people done this before and how do you know that you're measuring that? Are you going to do a 6-week bench press incremental protocol and then test their squat RM? No, because they're not linked, right? So there's not precedence for doing that kind of stuff. But are you going to test their leg press strength after 6 weeks of an intervention of sit-to-stands or whatever? Does that make sense? So is there like an actual way to test what the key performance indicators are that you want to measure? And then the fun part, the data collection or the intervention. So for me, it's just observational, but what are you actually going to do? Are you going to do a questionnaire? Are you going to do exercise? Are you going to test? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? And then the 6th step is how do you know your intervention was actually successful? So this is something that I've been challenged on a lot in my PhD, particularly because my research team, or at least 2/3 of them, come from a data analysis performance lens. So when I was like, I'm going to measure the performance of AFLW athletes, they were like, great, what's performance? And I was like, I don't know, like GPS and technical stuff. And yeah, but how do you know that that's performance? So I got challenged massively and it almost threw me completely off kilter. It was real fun. And then it could be step 7 or whatever it is, but how are you actually going to convey this information? Are you going to explain this to your client? Are you going to present it back to your team? Are you going to take it to the health commission to tell them what you found? What are you going to do? So use this framework to come up with how you're going to see a client through a research lens. Go. We'll maybe do 5 to 10 minutes? What do you think? Cool.
Hannah, is it all right if that other slide you had on the floor to begin with? Thank you.
Sure. Anything we're stuck on? This is a fun part. This is the part where you get to be creative. Research is so creative. It is so fun. You just have to make it fun and make it creative. I'll show you how it can be fun and creative in a minute. But I think people do. They think that research is really binary, and it's not. You can actually be super creative. You do have to have precedence. You can't go completely wild, but you do get to think about how I can do something slightly differently. All right. Who's going to come and present first?
I'll do it.
We're all going to do it.
I've like half done mine.
That's okay.
I'm so lost with this.
That's okay.
Do you have a crack, Charles? Tell them how you're going to learn. Go on.
Do you want to try and finish it?
Mine's like, I'm pretty sure it's fairly simple.
But
You go.
Okay.
I had to grab the
Sorry.
mic.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, this is a way to see things. It's not a method that you have to implement all the time. It's just a different way of thinking about things that if it doesn't come naturally to you, it didn't come naturally to me when I first did it either. Go.
So my problem is improving shoulder range of motion and strength in people with bilateral adhesive capsulitis for 45 to 55-year-olds.
Specific. Good.
I've actually got a client who is like this.
Great.
Oh,
This
who
is what we want. Yeah.
So the hypothesis was for people with poor shoulder range of motion and strength, is an isometric loading protocol enough to see changes in range of motion and strength?
What's your hypothesis, though?
Is it enough? Is it enough? Is it like, is that loading protocol or is an isometric loading protocol enough to see positive changes?
Yeah, but what do you think is going to happen?
So
So that's your hypothesis, right?
Yep.
What you think is actually going to happen?
I think it will change.
Cool.
For the good.
Yeah.
The design was 8 weeks of 1 session per week of an isometric loading protocol of 3 sets of 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off for 3 exercises.
Cool.
The data collection would be using our valved range of motion and a UEFS questionnaire.
So you've gone subjective and objective.
Yeah.
Great. I like it.
The analysis would be range of motion in degrees
Yep.
and obviously measured pre and post the 8 weeks along with the questionnaire. And then the report writing stuff would be just the valid results in a PDF and then just comparing the upper limb extremity questionnaires.
Cool. Here's a curveball for you. What might be some of your confounding factors? So how do you know that the isometric protocol that you specifically did is the thing that's making it better? If you think that it's going to make it better, which is your hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to do it if you
How do I
don't
know
think
it's
it's
the
going to
only
work.
thing?
Yeah. How do you know that you can be sure that what you delivered actually caused the outcomes? Are you going to control for any confounding factors? Do you just let them go about their life? Do you stop them from doing any other upper body things?
No, well, this person
Yep.
actually can't because
Yep.
their range of motion is quite poor. So their ability to do other exercises in the gym
Yep.
is quite limited.
So you're pretty confident that what you're going to give them is going to be the thing that's going to cause a change.
Based on how they
Present.
presented.
Great.
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Who's next?
Mine's not even 50% of Adam's, but
Who's?
Okay, just
You can have a crack.
problem was
Oh, sorry, Charles.
my problem was oncology patient is unable to exercise due to cancer-related fatigue, so they're missing sessions. Hypothesis: if they engage in 3 low-intensity resistance sessions per week, their fatigue will go down. Research design: I'd only written 3 45-minute supervised sessions per week. And data collection: I'd look at VAS fatigue scale, pre-post session, weekly average, looking at adherence with sessions. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had down.
That's fine. That's great. Next. You're going to have a lot of confounding factors, so.
Okay. I struggled to do this, so I was thinking about a NDIS client that I have that has had a stroke, and the problem is knowing whether or not he will be able to continue to see progress with his health and fitness, or whether we've reached the best health that we can. At the
Okay.
moment.
That's a complex problem.
Yeah.
This is going to be my final point about
Yeah.
keeping your problem simple, but that's okay. Go for it.
So hypothesis, I believe if he follows a progressive routine of strength and health and all the rest of it, he can continue to see benefits to those areas. I don't think he's at the finish line yet.
Okay.
Research design to create a progressive 12-month, this will be measured over 12 months, this intervention, right, which would include resistance training, cardio, neurological training, balance. The KPI would be return to work full-time and return to driving.
Cool.
How
How are you going to know which intervention is going to cause? So you're going to do strength,
That's right.
cardio, balance. How do you know which of them is going to cause the outcome that you want? Or, alternatively, this is the entire intervention I'm giving them?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
My supervisor does this to me all the time. He asks me questions, not because he thinks I have the answer to them, but to make me think about them.
I know.
I've started doing it to people and it's great. I feel very powerful because he does it to me all the time.
I don't think we'll be able to tell whether or not there's a direct from one particular style of training.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really hard to know.
And this is kind of my point, I think, with exercise physiology, this is what I can gather, is that we just go so broad. We're going to do everything. We're going to do strength, we're going to do power, we're going to do speed, we're going to do all this stuff, and then we're going to see if there was a successful outcome. Whereas I think what we need to do is, we can do all of those things, but what can we focus on for that point in time and get really specific about what we're measuring, how we're going to measure it, and then what the outcome actually is. And that is difficult in clinical practice because you can't I don't want you to do anything else, I just want you to do strength. I get that. But I think we can get better at it by coming to a middle ground.
Yeah.
So for you, it's specificity. It's you can go really broad, but then it's you're not really doing research, you're just kind of doing observational stuff, right? How confident are you in what you're doing is actually yielding your outcomes?
Yeah.
Specific. Dean's turn.
Mine was improving motor coordination, strength, and power output with a Parkinson's client.
So again, we've got motor control, strength and power output.
Yeah.
Yep.
Indirectly. So mine was looking at whether a multi-pronged exercise intervention focusing on resistance training, balance, and high amplitude training yields better improvement in function of those with Parkinson's disease. So the research design was again looking at sort of over a 12-month period, looking at least 2 times a week for a 12-week period, and then having them do some exercise independently for 3 months, and then same thing again, 3 months of face-to-face twice a week, and then 3 months of independently completing some exercise. Had to be diagnosed with PD within the last 2 years at a minimum. Was looking at data collection with outcome measures assessing dynamic balance, motor coordination, lower limb strength, power and dexterity, as well as a questionnaire of PDQ 39.
When are you going to do your outcome measures?
Pre and post, ideally, but for what I wanted to do is doing it at every 12-week intervention, so them doing it start of the 12-week block of seeing me, then at the end of that 12-week, and then looking at after 12 weeks of them doing it independently.
Yep.
So looking at over then them, how they went, when they're coming back and recommencing for that next block of face-to-face. Data analysis, again, as sort of that. Reports in data collection as well, was looking at obviously neurologist scan results as well to see if there's been any changes from a neurological point of view that they've picked up or in scans, whether it's deterioration or rate of deterioration. And then looking at reports for a client about results and progression, as well as report to your neurologist as well regarding changes.
What changes are you going to measure?
Particularly looking at, honestly, particularly sort of what I'm more looking at is whether there's been the rate of deterioration that they've seen, particularly from a neurological point of view, whether that's changed. That'll obviously be via the scans more so and the neurologist's feedback. As well as looking at, has there been progression in balance, motor coordination, function, so whether that has either progressed or whether that's maintained where it's at the moment.
How are you going to measure that?
So via that is via actual assessments, so looking at specifically assessments for that.
How are you going to measure the change?
So looking at change in terms of time-based, or as in like as a whole?
How are you going to measure their improvement?
Yep. So with their condition, given the nature it is a progressive condition, like my thinking with it is if there's actual progression in their actual outcome measure results, which are limited based off of their assessment, but if they're not necessarily regressing in their function and daily life as well.
Cool. Specific. Cool. That was good. How not different to being a normal EP is that? This is similar, right? It's just what you do on a daily basis. Again, it's just looking at it through a slightly different lens to objectify what you're doing. And I think becoming more specific in what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that's why I asked you questions about what are you actually going to measure and how you're going to do it. Because I think we live up here in the vague, and that's something I've done. I'm like, I'm going to measure strength and power. And my supervisor's like, great, how are you going to do it? I'm like, with the veld. And like, great, how are you going to do it? I'm like, I'm going to do a counter movement jump. Great, how are you going to do it? What protocol are you going to use to do it? What veld, you know what veld is like? They were like, what are you going to pull out of veld to show me that there's been tangible change? What are you actually going to use that shows me that are you going to use peak power? Are you going to use peak force? Are you going to use jump height with the 70 different ways you can measure jump height on veld? So it's becoming really specific around what you're picking, why you're picking what you're doing, and then how you're going to measure that change. I think we can get better at that from like, that's what clinicians can learn from researchers on how to be more specific around what we're doing. Because then you can be really clear when you're like, I showed this outcome and then this happened, and then if you present it back to the client in a digestible way, how powerful is that?
When you, from like a clinical standpoint, when does becoming too specific actually like negate change? So like I completely understand it from a research point of view, but like from a clinical setting, if I'm working with someone and I'm giving them a whole different thing of interventions through a program, so whether that's some aerobic based stuff, whether that's some balance, whether that's some strength, whatever that might be, at the end of the day, if they've come to me and said, Adam, I have improved in this, I don't actually really care what has made the change. The change for me is that they have noticed that there has been change.
Yeah.
When do you think being too specific in going down a certain avenue with the client becomes negative?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep. I think if you're achieving the outcomes that you're setting out to do, play on. You might not necessarily need to go down this pathway. If you've got a really, that's what I'm saying, you don't need to apply this to every single thing that you do. I would use this model when you're stuck and you've got a problem and you're like, I can't solve this problem. And we're going to go through in a minute what that might look like from a clinic perspective as opposed to a client perspective. But I think being too specific can be very negative because you get bogged down in data, which is not what I encourage. I think if you're getting outcomes and you're like, yeah, everything's tracking along really well, fantastic. But if you're trying outcomes and they're not working, come back to this model and be like, okay, well, why is what I'm doing not working? Am I measuring the right things? Am I doing the right intervention? Am I doing what other people have done? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't, if you've got a client in front of you, like, yeah, I know how to manage this. I've had something similar. I'm going to apply this type of intervention that I know has been successful for me. Play on. You don't need to go down this whole rabbit hole. But if you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm stuck and I'm not really sure how to go about it, that's where I divert to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to stop you and be like, if you've got all these great outcomes, to go back, like to take a step back and go completely backwards. It's like, all right, I'm going to now go through all of these steps of the process because you're going backwards to go forwards when you don't need to. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
All right. Little brief one, but think about like the impact that you can have. So the impact of like, does it work? And then the implementation of actually doing that. I think from an implementation point of view, that's where EPs are really strong because we know what our clients are going to be able to do, if that makes sense. Whereas from a research lens, that's where researchers are terrible at it because they're like, great, I'm going to design this really complex way of doing things. And then clinicians like, fantastic, how are you going to actually do that? The does it work, I think, is more of the part that potentially can fit into this equation. But that's the maximum impact that you can have is does it work and then how is this actually going to work? So a couple of examples of things that I've done. I wrote this really fast, so there are some like spelling mistakes, so I do apologise. But this again is it's more of, I guess, a career map as well of things that I found that have progressed my career really, really well and really clearly. They're all sports science, so sorry, but that's just, again, where I'm at. So I collected data from a talent league, from all talent league clubs. It was part of my job for AFL. Across an entire season, I databased it all, and it took a year. And I databased every single thing that we could pull out of Catapult GPS. I databased everything. There's one thing I've learned, it's take out all the data that you might consider wanting and then just leave it. If you use it, use it. If you don't, you don't. Because I deleted data in my honours and I could never get it back. And it was not fun. So grab it all and then decide what you want to do with it. Databased it, I analysed it, I reported on it to inform the AFL of how the game's changed in subsequent years. So we looked at 2017 to 18 to 19 to 20 to 21 and basically presented back to the AFL and said, okay, there's more stoppages in this and this is how fit they are and this is how they did testing and yada, yada, yada. Very simple stats analysis, literally just change over time. But now coaches make decisions based off this information. Impact, strong. At the Dogs, at the end of the season, our HPM was like, I've got a problem, our exit interviews take me too long and it's a mess. That's his problem, right? That's his systemic process problem. So I used the skills that I learnt from all my talent league stuff to create a new system and upskilled in making an interactive dashboard on Excel, which took 6 months. 6 months. It meant that the HPM could pull a drop-down box of the girl's name. Everything would pop up from her data for the entire year. I made his life very, very, very easy. And we used it for every exit interview for every single girl. And then we'll go again this year and we'll build on that and make it better again. My VALD project, again, HPM had a problem. He's like, I want to track fatigue over the season. We're going to do counter movement jump, drop jump, and squat jump, depth jump, one of them. Once a week, every 3 weeks, I'm going to rotate them through. I want you to capture this data and explain to me how that they're fatigued or not fatigued or if they're adjusted to training. Again, I made a dashboard on VALD Hub. That was actually really easy. Then I realized that it wasn't doing the job that I wanted it to. It wasn't answering the question that I needed to get back. So I made my own dashboard. Again, probably took about 3 months. I basically made graphs of the players and their positions and their ages across time and presented it back to HV Medical. And I essentially got to understand that they were performing really well in their objective VALD measures across the whole of pre-season. So I could, on some level of confidence, go back to the HP team and say they're adapting. They're not dropping in their performance measures across time because I had 30 athletes that I was able to look at. Really simple. We embedded that into their training. And then our gym aware project that we're going to use, which is the one I'm kind of really excited about because players aren't hitting typical speeds. You guys know what gym aware is? Yeah? Cool. Awesome. No? Yes? Oh, so they're like these...
Is that like VBT?
Yeah. Yeah. So like velocity-based
like,
training tag things that sit on barbells and they measure the speed of the bar.
Measures like velocity, so how fast you move the bar.
Yeah. So we use it to program for like strength and power. So if we want them to go like slow, like time under tension, we'll program like a slow speed. And then if we want them to like move really explosively, we'll tell them to hit between a certain range. Problem was the ranges that we were using for the force velocity curve, none of our girls could hit, which is kind of fascinating. And then I went to literature and I was like, great, where are the norms for VBT for female athletes? None, 0. Again, not shocked because I work in the female athlete space. I was like, fantastic, I'm going to make my own database. So we pulled data from, and this is the great thing about VALD, GymAware, all these tech-based things, Team Builder, we can pull 7 years of GymAware data from every lift that every girl has done since the start of AFW. Again, we just tracked everything. And then we can pull it out and figure out what are some norms that our girls have done and maybe have they changed over time? Maybe where they haven't. How can our girls sit in that? That's something we're still doing, so we'll be able to do that. So the 3 bottom, this was my job. The 3 bottom ones is sort of my job, but not really. Literally HPM was like, I've just got a problem. I need you to solve it. And that's what I do. I literally just go in and solve problems. It's great. All of these 3 things took me like a year. But the outcome for him was worth doing that. And when I say it took me a year, I was doing it for 2 or 3 hours a week for an entire year. And yeah, there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets, but that's my life. We've done that, yay. Cool, so now you're going to put your heads together. How are we going for time? Done?
I've got a client at 3, so I'll have to run off.
Charlie's got to run, but we can continue. Yep.
Yeah? Okay. We're nearly done. But now I was going to say, put your heads together, the 3 of you, and think of a problem, like a process problem similar to my valve stuff that your clinic has currently. So what's a process that you're like, this is just not working, we need to improve it? And then figure out how you're going to apply a research lens to figure out whether your process is improved. And that's like a clinic success thing, right? So what's the thing that you want to improve to make your clinic better? Does that make sense? Yeah, we've all gone. Every single clinic I've worked at has like got a list of 6 processes that like this is not working.
I'll stay for a couple of minutes and I'll
Yeah.
be all right.
Maybe just go to get a.
Alright.
What do you want? I think one problem we do have is we don't actually we collect data from a lot of our clients, just like that or anything.
Questionnaires or whatever, but we don't collate it.
We just don't
Do anything with it.
We got heaps of it.
Well, we do stuff with it in terms of like getting it used for proof of work cover and like to justify that it is much work.
What's the question that you have?
Yeah.
Question is, how do we use all the data that we have available to us to, grow the business, I suppose, or build or show our community how awesome we are, like the outcomes we're actually achieving at MK Movement.
Great.
So.
Our problem is, how do we know how many people we've touched? Remember the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. You're on your own now. Okay, so, yep. Great. What data are you currently collecting?
We're currently collecting range of motion, strength, or like isometric strength. We're collecting questionnaires.
Oh, you guys are sitting on a gold mine.
We're collecting...
Got so much stuff.
Does Google reviews count? A bit like data of success stories.
Does it help answer your question?
About us being able to better...
You know how I said I spent 8 months formulating my research question? This is why. Because if you're not clear on that, everything else is a mess. So your research question or your problem to solve has to be so clear. So clear. That's where we get stuck, is because we go vague.
Right, okay.
Because you're asking me whether or not you Google, I don't know, does it help answer your question?
Yeah.
Hey?
Well, I'm confused. What's the problem?
So, what we're talking about is we have a whole heap of data that we do collect from our population of people we see. However,
We don't do anything with it.
yeah, we don't make any decisions based on it. We don't
present it. We don't do
regurgitate
anything.
it.
So your problem would be,
We just collect it.
We just
Yeah.
collect it. Well, like we do say that, like if we're applying for more treatment sessions, that this, like we tested this, our
Yep.
intervention's working. So like we do show it, but not to the extent that we.
Not a big impact.
No,
We're not
not
having any-
on a global scale.
We could have a bigger impact
Yeah.
on our community if we were clear about
Yeah.
how to present it and what to do with it.
so your problem is you don't have a way to show your community that they're succeeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even just
There you
like stakeholders like where we work here.
Yep.
Like to go into a meeting with the director and be like, hey, this is what we're
Yep.
achieving with your members.
Yep.
Um,
So does your Google reviews help answer that question? Leave that to later because you don't know what you want to measure yet.
Yeah, okay, true.
So that's the method, but you haven't described what you're going to measure and how you're going to do it.
What data? So how can you collect some different data that might help?
That I didn't know what you had, as in like I just put these questions together, not knowing what you would have had access to for data collection purposes. But you have a lot, which is great. It was more that if you weren't collecting stuff, what could you do? I just didn't know what you had access to that you were able to use. But you actually have a gold mine. Do something with it, please.
Yep. Do you want me to just keep going through these questions? Okay, what's the hypothesis?
If we can showcase our data effectively, I don't know.
We will get more referrals, more new leads.
Greater.
So your outcome measures is leads.
Could be.
Attrition as well.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you might measure referrals and number of visits. That's going to determine your success of your data sharing project. With me?
Yep.
Research design.
So you're going to do visits. Yeah. Are you going to do visits per practitioner? Are you going to do visits per clinic? What if they attend? What if they book but don't attend?
We also want to collect data on late cancellations, which we already do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so what do you do with that information? So you can also collect, so cancellations might be one thing that helps you determine the success of your outcomes.
Okay.
Referrals, how are you going to capture referrals?
But are we looking, let's say referrals, are we looking at referrals from data that we've regurgitated? Or are we just looking at capturing referrals just from?
Tom, Dick and Harry.
That's up to you. How does it answer your research question?
Well, we want to know if we present this,
If we present data to the community, do we get a benefit from it?
Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Took me 7 months to do that. You've done it in 3 minutes.
Do we get a benefit from showcasing our?
Yeah, you're sort of blending your two ideas of data together, but that's okay.
Okay.
So like, do people come up to us and say, I've seen the results that you've had with this group, I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Like a direct referral from that. Or like people have said, like I've got a participant who's in that group who she said you've got make a really good change. Like, is it like those kind of referrals?
Yep.
Directly from showcasing that.
That's where you're showcasing the data as well. Like you're going out and presenting the data, or you're just like posting it. That's two different things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because if you're going to like somewhere and actually presenting that data, like Charlie Dower presenting like a cancer group to cancer, like you're getting all some.
That's it. Different data attracts different people as well, right?
Good. Very good.
Good job, Charles.
Because we wanted
I could do a whole another 2 hours on types of data.
I think we wanted to really
But
do
we
this
won't,
with
'cause
your
it's boring.
cancer group, really, we had specific, like just i.e. 6-minute walk test or whatever
Yeah.
subjective measure, coming to see you, 12 weeks post, collect the
They've
same.
now increase their walking speed by 50%.
Right.
This could be
Which
you.
We could be going to an oncologist saying, hey, our program does this.
Yeah.
So your intervention then would be delivery of, your intervention is like showcasing the delivery of content to your community, right? Because you want to display that. You haven't figured out how you're going to do that yet. Is it social media? Is it just posted around your gym? Is it newsletters? That's your intervention, right? So your intervention is, I'm going to showcase this to our community. I'm going to showcase the changes we've had to our community. And then you're going to directly measure, not really directly, but you're going to try and measure whether or not that intervention, the showcasing intervention, had an effect on your uptake of clientele. Make sense?
Yep.
It's lots of things that clinics are already doing, they're just not doing it really systemized. Does that make sense? Whereas when you look at through this lens, you can systemize it. And you're like, yep, this is what we did, this is how much change we had, and this was how we measured it. And then, okay, that didn't really work so well, what are we going to do for next time? We're going to roll this out across 6 weeks, because I think that's what we get stuck in clinics. Like, oh, we're just going to do this. And then you do it, and then you're like, oh, it didn't really uptake, nothing really happened, it just sort of fizzled out. Whereas if like, we're going to deliver an 8-week intervention of showcasing our members their change, we're going to see what happens.
Over the next
Does that make
8
sense?
weeks, we're going to call our initial consults within 3 days and see our rebooking rate.
But yeah, no, this all makes sense. This is good.
What was the next one? What is the best format to display this data?
Yeah, so you've kind of already answered that, right? Because you wanted to,
yeah.
that's where you go back to your
Might just jump
stakeholders and you
into
go back
this
to your
now.
success.
I'm going to run. Thank you so much for today. This has been really good.
No worries.
You're really super passionate about what you do.
Aw.
Which is, yeah, it's been really nice.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you again here soon. I'll leave you boys to the problem
Thanks,
solving.
Charles.
Yeah, thanks,
you.
Charles.
Thank you.
We'll chat about it later.
Yep,
Yeah.
done.
See ya.
So you might want your data to go to stakeholders. You're going to book an appointment with your gym, or you're going to book an appointment with whoever it is that you want to display this data to, and you're like, when we started showing our data to our members, this is how much community uptake we had. This is why it's a success.
So
I think that's a big one for us because we want to build our relationship with
Yep.
the leisure centre we work
Yep.
at, and we do a lot of work with their members.
Yep.
And we want to show them how much impact organisations like MK Movement
Yep.
are having on the facility and the members and stuff. So I think being able to just clearly
Systemize it.
yeah, systemize
Yeah.
it. It's really helpful.
And this is where I go back to this, is it's like, it looks like I did a shit ton of work, but this is across 2 years. But I think it provided me with the opportunity to be like, I'm good at what I do and this is why. And I've got evidence and I've got proof and I can show you the impact that I've had physically. And I think I'm independent as I progress through my career, but you guys are a little bit unique in that way where you're a clinic, but you want the success of the clinic to go, I assume, on an upwards trajectory, right? You want more clients and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So when you want to take this stuff, I think that's where systemizing your data collection can help you to then present further on and know what to present that's actually impactful. It's like, if you've ever written a resume, and someone always told me this, they're like, don't tell me what you've done on your resume, tell me how you were better at it than anyone else. But it's like, you need data for that, right? You need to, like, I didn't implement a strength and power program with AFW athletes. I implemented a strength and power program with athletes and I had this much change over this amount of time, and I'm really confident in my approach of what I did. Does that make sense? Yeah.
it's like, like the headspace stuff. Is that
Yeah.
you collect, like,
This will be Dino's project.
yeah, we can set up something like this, take it back to them in 4 months' time and said, with the 15 participants that you gave us,
Yep.
we applied this intervention and got this result, which
Yep.
which has meant this.
Yeah.
Which meant that they have more energy during the day, they
Yep.
feel better about themselves, whatever it is. So
I do this for, didn't even touch on that, but I do that type of stuff for the company that I work for Live Life Whole. So I write their content and have facilitated it, but one thing they've got me doing is building their evaluation surveys from the schools that they go into and the girls that they go and deliver these courses to, because they had a grant from the education system, but their grant's about to run out because that's what happens to grants. So they want people to keep funding their project. And they need to show that their project has successful outcomes and that it's reducing the burden on the healthcare system indirectly, because you can't be like, this did this.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
presentations for young girls in emergency type settings, they need to show that stuff. So I've set up surveys for them that help them capture that information so we can write reports on it and take it to bodies and be like, our education program did this. They felt like 98% of participants were whatever, and they felt like we're kind of assessing behaviour change. So like, 78% of girls said they were really, and it's all subjective, but subjective data is still so important. But it's like they said that they wanted to change their behaviour related to their mental health or their thing. So I think like that's where my passion lies in these skills. It's like I use these skills in like so many different places that help me, in my opinion, become more successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just moulding that to what you want to do as an EP.
I think even like collecting feedback data, how we,
What we do with it.
Yeah.
how we,
Yeah.
we collect
Yeah.
some feedback.
Yeah, and this is what I find fascinating. This is what I hoped was going to happen, is that you're actually collecting so much data. You just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is true. Like, I mean, every day we,
Yeah.
like every time a client comes in, we're collecting data on their
Yeah.
session output. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we can make changes based on how they're performing, what their output's like, based on how they present on the day for a future.
Yeah.
Things like,
Yeah.
every time you see them is a chance to reassess or assess.
And I think like I didn't really even get to it today, but understanding the limitations of your data is so powerful as well, because it's like you're not saying that every person that, like, you're not overstating what's happening, and that's something that's important to consider as well. If you're collecting data from a whole range of different participants, you need to understand the confounding factors that are going to go into that and how it's going to influence their outcomes. So for me, I'm like, I can't say that menstrual cycle tracking in AFW can apply to endurance athletes and cyclists and those kinds of things. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not going to not do the research because of it, but I'm very, very honest and open about what I'm actually collecting and what it's actually showing, because I understand that process. So it's like, great, we had all these successful outcomes, but we know, or what we're presenting back to the stakeholders or whatever it is, or our members in community, I'm honest about what that is. And I think that's what we're objectively losing with the rise of like social media and those kinds of things as well. It's like, look how great we are at what we do. And it's like, well, how do you know that we actually are? Yeah.
And I suppose you see all those people on Instagram that random, like knees over toes guys.
Yeah.
Some, they've got their
Yeah.
beliefs, and then they might, I don't know, but they might not be willing to look at the other research that shows that
They will not
other
budge
knee
out of their
strengthening
lane.
programs will be better than their program.
Yeah.
So
Even Jill Cook has said, like, she has openly
Is she
admitted-
tendon?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's so
She's
cool.
openly admitted that she's like,
Yeah.
I'm so far down a rabbit hole, and
Yeah.
I've heard it on a podcast she's done. She says, I'm so far down a rabbit hole, I'm not even considering anything else.
Yeah.
And like, she's pretty open in saying
Yeah,
that.
and she's probably self-aware enough to be able to do
Yeah.
that, but I guarantee you, and that's what I personally hope to maintain as long as I possibly can, is, and what I think has got me to where I am, is I've always had one foot in clubland, or in industry as we call, and I will not ever get out of that, because I'm like, well, wonderful to do research on a topic that like no one's ever going to use, and that's my gripe, is that practitioners don't like researchers and researchers don't like practitioners. I'm like, well, you could actually learn so much from each other. But it's figuring out like what's actually useful, and you're the people that need to figure out what's useful for your business and your success. That's why I'm not going to tell you what is. It's up to you to figure that out. It's just figure out the processes that can help you get there, instead of just, the clinics I've worked at have had just, and they do it with marketing and stuff, and I find that really interesting, is like the corporate world of marketing and how systemized they are with their marketing rollouts and how they measure their success based off that stuff. You could get someone in that would probably say the exact same stuff as me, it's just from a marketing lens, not a sports science lens.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff.
That was mad.
Done.
thank you, Hannah.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
mate.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I think
I think
we walk
this-
away with
That was mad.
Cool.
some methods to how we can
Yeah.
approach things, and just even clarity about how we think about problems
Yeah.
as well. So that was really, really cool.
Cool. Normally I present on menstrual cycle stuff, so I'm like, it's a little bit different, but I really enjoyed it because it's what I do every day. So